Hello everybody, welcome to Mill Race Village. My name is Sue Lobbs, I'm a docent here. That's kind of a fancy word for a tour guide. How many of you have been here to Mill Race before? Some of you have, some of you haven't. Well, Mill Race is about 7 acres. It was donated back in the early 70s by the Ford Foundation so we could create this historical village. All of the buildings here were in the Northville area at one time, but they weren't all in this one spot. They've all been moved here, so it's convenient for people to visit them all in this little walking circle that we have in this 7 acres of land. This land was important to Henry Ford because he and his wife Clara actually had their honeymoon in this area and he fell in love with it. So he did create the Ford valve plant that is now Planet Fitness over there. And like I said, this area was donated in the 70s for this historical society. So the first building we're going to go into is the Cady Inn. The Cady Inn is the oldest of all of the buildings. It was established in 1831, if you can believe that, almost 200 years ago. Now, when you think of the word inn, you might think of a Holiday Inn or a Hampton Inn. You know, a modern hotel today has a pool and has individual rooms. Well, this kind of inn really serviced the people who were traveling maybe from Detroit on horseback or with a wagon or with a stagecoach, because that's all they really had at the time. And it would take them pretty much all day to get here from Detroit. Nowadays, it takes us about a half an hour in a car, right? So by the time they got here, they were tired, their horses were tired. So the innkeeper would feed the horses, would give them water, let them rest, invite the people in so they could have a simple meal. Maybe just, you know, some stew, whatever he was able to hunt and kill to make some kind of a stew or a soup for dinner, bacon and beans, that kind of thing, maybe some biscuits. And they'd be invited in for a meal, and then upstairs, there were 2 rooms, one for males, one for females, and they could rest up there. They could sleep, they could just take a nap if they wanted. So that was the kind of inn this was. So let's go in and we'll talk a little bit more about when people first settled here in Northville. So now we're here inside the Cady Inn, and if you look around, you'll notice that there's a wood floor, which is the original. This area actually was added on later, so this wood wall over here shows the kind of siding that the home had originally. It was wood siding, wood floor here in the dining room. You could see the wood beams up here on the ceiling. The reason they used wood was because they had to use the resources that they had at the time. So when people first started coming here in the early 1800s, Michigan was all forest. People came here because they heard that land was cheap and they wanted to farm it. So let's go back to, you might have heard about the Erie Canal. Mainly you learn about that, I think, in 3rd grade. So the Erie Canal was built up so people from upstate New York could come down to Toledo and work their way into Michigan. They started using the Erie Canal because it was a very easy way to get here. Now, a canal is different than a river. You know, a river, you have a current, you can paddle a boat, but canals don't have a current because they're hand built. So to get here, you would have 2 mules on either side of the canal pulling your boat, if you can imagine that, to get people here. Why did people come here? Those farmers heard that land in Michigan was very, very cheap. It was going for $2 an acre. But believe it or not, they thought even that was a little bit expensive, so the price was dropped to $1.25 an acre. So people started coming here that were up in New York area, and they came here because that land was cheap enough, and they thought, oh, you know, we heard that the soil was good for farming, let's go and settle in Michigan. What's really interesting to me personally is that I found out that a farm that my dad bought in Macomb County, about an hour from here, he bought it in 1950, and it was 124 acres. After we sold that farm in 2023, we got some of our old papers out, and it showed that there were people that lived along the Erie Canal that came and bought that land in 40-acre parcels. You were required to buy at least 40 acres. So it was very interesting to me that 3 different people who lived along the Erie Canal in upstate New York actually were the ones that came and bought that land that eventually became the farm that I grew up in. I thought that was pretty cool. And the certificates were signed by President Van Buren. So they had bought a 40-acre, another 40-acre, and another 40-acre. That made 120. But because the road was kind of cockeyed, they got a few extra acres, so that's why it was 124. So it was kind of interesting that I've been giving these tours all this time and found out that I even have a personal connection to that. So back to the Cady Inn. So when all these people start coming down here, they arrive here and it's all woods. So they had a lot of wood available to them, which they needed because there were no homes, there were no markets, there were no grocery stores or anything like that. They had to build, and they used that wood to build. So that's what you see here. All right, so like I said, they had all the wood they needed with all the forests here. So they had to clear those forests anyway to make land for their farming, to clear that land. So they used that wood that they cleared to build their houses, as I said, and the furniture was made out of wood as well as the structures themselves. Some things they did have to bring with them from the East Coast, and often they would bring their things that are made out of tin, like the chandeliers here, if you can look up there. Now, nowadays, electricity has been added to the building, but back then electricity was not available. So they might have brought these chandeliers, but instead of these electric candles, they would have been real candles. And of course, those candles burn and have to be replaced often. So one of the things they would have brought with them would have been this, a cool little candle maker. So a mold where they would pour the wax in, put the wick in, and pull them out, and they would go through these often. A lot of their dishes were also tin. We usually, tin or pewter, there's usually a couple here. I'm not sure where they are right now, but you can see a couple tin reflectors up there that reflect the light from the candles. And I'm not really sure where our plates are right now, but those are the kinds of things they would have had to bring with them, because of course they weren't available here. So let's walk over here. Now, as I said, all of these buildings were moved here. So when they lifted them up from where they were originally, sometimes they would find things in the ground. And over here, we have this case that shows some of the things that were found around the home when they lifted it up to move. So it gives you an idea. For instance, there's a little China doll head or a marble. Kids still play with marbles today, but they played with them 200 years ago. There were some shards of, some of their ceramic ware. There are some old hinges, some old nails. So these were the original things from the house built, or from the inn built in 1831. So those are kind of interesting. Their flooring for their ceilings, all of the framing around the windows, the furniture, and the floors. Nowadays, this building is rented out. People rent it out for like weddings or showers or speaking engagements or birthday parties, things like that. All right.